Week 10 is here and the tight end landscape is shifting again. We've got some breakouts holding steady, veterans fighting to stay relevant, and a few names making noise inside of the top 15. So let's look at where the Headliners crew landed on this week's tight end rankings. What's up, Headliner Nation? My name is Brad, the Rankings King, and before we dive into this week's rankings, just a reminder that these are the consensus rankings from the Headliners team. And for more detailed analysis, make sure to check out the start-sit videos from Kyle, already posted on the channel this week. And if you want even more breakdowns each week, join the Fantasy Headliners community by hitting that join button below. That's going to get you access to extra rankings like flex, kicker, defense, and a spot inside of our Discord. Now, before we dive into Week 10, we've got a few hits and misses from week number 9. Our first hit was Colston Loveland, and we are totally claiming this because we told everyone to pick him up in the waiver wire video. We had him ranked in the top 12, and now dude exploded, but nobody had him ranked higher than us. Next up is Travis Swift-Kelsey, and we kept him inside the top 10 in a matchup against Buffalo, and he finished at tight end 8. Our next hit was Sam Laporta, and he's been so hit or miss this year, but we kept him in the top 10 as well, and he finished at top 5. Okay, but what about our misses? And we start with Jake Ferguson. And 7 targets should have been more than enough for him to return his tier 2 ranking, but everything was short. He couldn't find the end zone, and he had a costly fumble. Next up is Dalton Schultz, and after Stroud went out, Schultz turned into a top target for Mills, and we had him way too low in the rankings. And then our next miss was Pat Freiermuth, and he needs a touchdown to be relevant, and guessing which weeks that's going to happen are next to impossible. All right, so let's move it on to Week 10, and let's look at Tier 1. We've got Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, Aronde Gadsden, Sam Laporta, and Dalton Kincaid. At number 1, we've got Brock Bowers, and what a return last week for Bowers. He hadn't played since week 4, but after week 9, he is currently the tight end 10 overall. This Denver matchup will be difficult, but the Raiders just traded away Jacoby Myers, so Bowers is about to have a Friendsgiving feast. At number 2, we've got Trey McBride, and McBride is currently the tight end 1 overall in the season, and he hasn't scored less than 14 fantasy points in his last 3 games. Now he gets a matchup against Seattle, who allows the 9th most fantasy points per game to the tight end position. At number 3, we have Aronde Gadsden, and it's crazy how he can have a game with 9.3 fantasy points, and we're all disappointed, right? That could be a good sign for us in decent matchups like this one against the Steelers, who allow the 3rd most fantasy points per game to the tight end position. At number 4, we have Sam Laporta, and he's the A.J. Brown of the tight end position, and he continues to be impossible to predict. In the last 7 games, he's got 4 with less than 6 points and 3 with at least 14. I feel a lot better in good matchups like this one against Washington. At number 5, we have Dalton Kincaid, and Kincaid finally looked healthy in week 9, and he was highly utilized in the Buffalo offense. He should be once again as well against a Dolphins defense this week that allows over 13 fantasy points per game to the tight end position. All right, that's it for Tier 1. Now, before we head into the next tier, I want to make sure that you're all hooked up on Underdog. You already know that we're crushing those player pick'ems on Underdog this year, so what are you waiting for? Head over to Underdog Fantasy or download the app. Create a new account using the referral code Headliners when you do so. Then just make your initial deposit and come join a contest. And if you sign up with that promo code, again, it's Headliners, you'll get access to all of the promos that Underdog offers weekly. And check this out. When you play your first $5, they're going to give you $100 in bonus funds. So you play 5, you get 100. It's that easy. And don't forget that Jake is also going to be breaking down the best picks weekly in our show on Fridays. So links to join are in the description below, and we look forward to playing with you on Underdog this week. All right, let's turn the page to Tier 2. We've got Dallas Goedert, Tyler Warren, George Kittle, Colston Loveland, and Kyle Pitts. At number 6, we have Dallas Goedert, and Goedert has been one of the most touchdown-dependent tight ends on this season. He's got 7 touchdowns through 7 games, but he hasn't had more than 3 targets in back-to-back games. Now he gets the Packers, who give up the 8th most fantasy points per game to tight ends. At number 7, we have Tyler Warren, and back-to-back games with less than 8 fantasy points is not ideal, especially with an upcoming game against Atlanta, who allows the fewest fantasy points to tight ends at only 4.3. But at least Indianapolis is one of the best offenses in football. At number 8, we have George Kittle, and Kittle wasn't a part of the huge offensive explosion the last time that these two teams met. He couldn't get much going against the Giants last week, and the Rams won't be any easier against opposing tight ends. At number 9, we have Colston Loveland, and the question is, can he do it again? That's the biggest question. Luther Burden and Cole Kmet are once again questionable to play. which means that he could have a great chance at more targets this week against the Giants, who allow over 10 fantasy points per game to tight ends. At number 10, we have Kyle Pitts, and now week 9 wasn't a great game for Kyle Pitts, but now with the matchup against Indy, you have to think that Sauce Gardner now on the Colts helps limit Drake London, which could lead to more targets going the way of Kyle Pitts. All right, so that's it for tier 2. Let's turn the page to tier 3. We have Dalton Schultz, Juwan Johnson, Harold Fannin Jr., Cade Otton, and Theo Johnson. At number 11, we've got Dalton Schultz, and CJ Stroud is in the old watermelon protocol, and if Davis Mills starts Dalton Schultz, he should see plenty of targets. He's had 10-plus fantasy points in 2 of his last 3, and now he gets a Jags defense that's probably still giving up yards to Brock Bowers. At number 12, we have Juwan Johnson, and Rashid Shaheed is no longer in town, and this was already an offense with limited weapons. This could easily lead to more targets for Johnson, who now gets a matchup against Carolina, who allows over 11 fantasy points per game to tight ends. At 13, we have Harold Fannin, and coming off the bye, there's no reason to think that the target share he's had doesn't remain. Now he gets a matchup against a Jets team that is in full-on tank mode. That should be enough to keep him as a Verge top 12 option on the week. At number 14, we have Cade Otton, and there's still a lot of questionable players in the Tampa Bay offense, which means Cade Otton should still be a part of their game plan against a New England defense that has struggled to contain tight ends, allowing over 12 fantasy points per game on the position. At number 15, we've got Theo Johnson, and this right here has to do with the lack of weapons in New York and the matchup this week against Chicago. He's had 5 touchdowns over his last 6 games, and we could use another one this week. All right, so there you go. There's your tiers 1, 2, and 3. And we've got a couple guys on the outside looking in with Mark Andrews, Hunter Henry, Isaiah Likely, Mason Taylor, Zach Ertz, TJ Hawkinson, AJ Barner, and Luke Musgrave. And that wraps up your tight end rankings for week 10. Who's locking down your lineup this week? We got to know, is it a top tier stud or one of those sneaky streamers? Drop your picks in the comments, smash that like button, and make sure you're subscribed for all of the latest fantasy breakdowns. Headliner Nation, we'll see you in the next video.
Analytics off the chain, all the channels not the same.